So welcome everybody around Keyfactor. This is a global event, so we're excited to have everyone joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, or this evening. And we do have a U.S. holiday coming up next week called Juneteenth, and we thought this was an opportune time to, really spend some time educating our staff. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our global strategy, as part of who we are as an organization, part of our global strategy. And so we wanted to have a speaker talk to us about their experiences and also educate some of us. So some of us are more familiar with Juneteenth, some of us are more familiar with the different things going on in the US and other parts of the world as it relates to social inequity, racial injustice, things like that. And so we have a speaker today, Jesse Lipscomb, joining us. I think you're based in Canada, Jesse, but he also was from Atlanta for a period of time, which we spoke about. But I will pass it over to him. He's going to kind of deliver a keynote, but he is also going to open it up for questions as he's speaking. So you can type things in the chat box if you have questions during the presentation. He will also have a Q&A at the end if you have questions directly for him as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jesse, and I will go off video. So Jesse, welcome. You're on mute.
What a rookie mistake. You'd think. That's funny. Hi, hello, everybody. I'll repeat it. Hello, Keyfactor. How are you? Thank you, Aaron. Oh, perfect. This is great. That's good. Okay, so Juneteenth. For those who don't know what Juneteenth is amazing, by the way. It's great. The Emancipation Proclamation, which was effective in 1863, Juneteenth was about 2 years later when freedom finally came in 1865 on June 19th for the hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. It was on June 19th, and so that's where the term came from, Juneteenth. It's basically like the second Independence Day in the States, and a place it's starting to get celebrated more and more. It's talked a lot about here in Canada as well. But what a great time to chat about diversity and inclusivity and being better allies and effective allies, especially in work that's globally reaching. So for those who don't know, now you know. And Juneteenth is it's a very, very special day. It's one of those things where Independence Day means something to some people and something completely different to other people. Thanksgiving means something completely different to other people. So Juneteenth is a very, very special holiday that should mean a lot to all the people, because it's an important understanding of what life looked like before, what it looks like right now, and where we're headed. And yes, that's right. So if you have any questions as I roll through this, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm definitely going to get to the vast majority of them at the end. But if you don't want to forget what you're going to say, please put them there. Also at the end, if you're brave enough to chat with me with a face-to-face, I would love it. We could actually have some questions, some Q&A that way, but no pressure at all. Feel free to toss them in the chat. So let's talk about this idea of allyship, the road to inclusivity. Every time I hear that, even though it's in the title, I'm not a giant fan of the word inclusive as much as I am about the idea of equity and that being a driver and a goal that we want to hit. Inclusivity, when I hear it, I always think of I. This idea of I want to include, it's this idea of I'll allow people into said space versus the idea of equity where, and I say equity over equality. And there's a big difference between the two. All right. So I'll even talk about that for a second. Like equal sounds great when everybody starts at the same place, right? Equal would be amazing there. But when we are well aware that there is giant disparities all over the place for many different individuals, then equality isn't enough. I mean, equity is what we really need to strive for. An easy example of that is so I have 3 children, but for argument's sake, I'll say I have 2. All right, I got 2 sons, and every morning I make them pancakes. And son 1 has always gotten 5 pancakes. Son 2 gets 3 pancakes. It's just how we've done it. But then someone tells me, hey, what about equity. Don't you think it makes sense that both your kids get the same amount of pancakes? Now, yes, it does. There's a couple of ways we could go about that. We could make more pancakes, or we could take one pancake from son one, give it to son two. Now they both have 4 pancakes. That being said, and I'll probably touch back on this a little bit later, but there's an initial feeling or initial fear that people feel when equity is mentioned. This idea of giving up something for the greater good. And yes, that feeling can exist, but also I think that's something that is a misnomer, and I'm going to talk about that piece later. But equity means all of us have the same amount. We're starting at the same place. Now, if both brothers want 5 pancakes, now let's make some more pancakes. Okay, so equity, like that better. Inclusivity always rubs me the wrong way a little bit. It's this idea of, the idea of we want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. We hear that idea often, right? So like diversity is often asking that question. Who is at the table? Now, if we talk equity, equity might respond, well, who's not at the table? And what barriers are present that have prevented them from being at the table? Then we can even go further a little bit, right? So like inclusion would ask, have everyone's ideas been heard that are at the table? Justice, let's go a step further. Will their ideas even be taken seriously if they're not a part of the majority? Right? All of these things are great questions, but the biggest piece in this one is like these questions, they kind of all center around whiteness. What do I mean by that? Well, decolonization would ask, who built the table and why was it built? These are great questions talking about the institutions that we're working in, who created the institutions, then asking those extra questions that go a little bit further than just saying, who do we need to talk to? Who's at the table when we're making decisions? Sometimes we do that and we think that might be enough. And I think we need to dig further and further and further. Sometimes the table itself is a barrier, right? Sometimes when we're talking about being culturally inclusive, we're having a culturally innovative and inclusive culture. What does that mean? We need to look beside our own unconscious bias of what's regular, what's quote unquote normal, and make sure that all of the things we dig in deeper to find out if we're creating barriers, even if we're intending not to. It's even if we're talking company wise too, because I'm thinking about this company, so many interesting things that can happen, things where, me as a neurodivergent person and how I learn and think differently, culturally, maybe differently. I might want to ensure that meetings are done in ways that are inclusive, that make sure they see the issues and barriers that might exist, whether it be make sure that, remote workers always feel included in meetings. Maybe, rotating meeting times. So different time zones aren't always having to do meetings at, 3 a.m. Other things that happen in online meetings a lot. When someone is recognized for an idea that someone else put forward in the meeting, make sure we point out who had the original idea. Even distributing work materials in advance before meetings. I mean, these things could go on. We can talk about those forever. But it's important just for those ideas of like, what do we do? What have we always done? And has that thing ever actually been problematic? Just because we've done it for a long time does not necessarily mean it's right. We know listen, Juneteenth, we can tell you right now, that's the truth. Just because you did it for a long time does not mean it was okay. So I'm happy Emancipation Proclamation came through. But as we talk about these things, one of the key things is understanding what our own privileges are. Like, we need to know our own privileges before we can start to get into the decision making and the behavior of actually change making, because our privileges inherently become our superpowers, the things we can use to help other people. Examples for that, like I'm tall, I got really long arms, so I can reach things that are super high. And easy peasy. We can go shopping in the grocery store, and someone who's not as tall might have some trouble. Maybe they're on a little step stool trying to get the strawberry jam on the top shelf. I walk by, hey, I got that for you. No problem. Boom, strawberry jam. We'll make some toast. That was nothing. I didn't work hard to have long arms. I didn't do anything special to have long arms, but I have them, and it makes life easier for me for high stuff. So I use my superpower, and I give it to some folks who don't have said thing. Another privilege that people often get all about, the elephant in the room, white privilege. And every time I mention white privilege, a lot of people will say, well, I don't have white privilege. It's not a real thing. I still had to work hard. I struggled. I don't have a lot of money. Everything wasn't easy for me. I didn't get anything free just because I was white. I agree. Nobody had said you did. I'll tell you what white privilege is by telling you what it's not. All white privilege says is that the color of your skin was not something that went against you working forward in life. It was not something that was a deterrent. That's it. Everything else can still be true. For me, I have a lot of privileges. But in Western society, in a racially systemic society, the color of my skin isn't an advantage, and the color of a white person's skin isn't a disadvantage. So that's all that is. I always got to make sure I talk about the elephant in the room because it usually is in the back of our minds. Privilege is that thing that we're talking about here that we didn't work hard for. It just was given to us. But it is something that puts us in an advantageous position, and we can then use it to help others who don't have it, right? That's the idea, is like trying to find individuals in the intersections that may not have the same privilege / superpower that you have. And then what do we do with it? How do we push everyone forward with said thing? There's a theory that I made called backpack theory. Backpack theory states this. So I grew up in St. Albert in Alberta, predominantly white. There was very few Black kids in my school. Remember I told you neurodivergent, so things will pop in mind. I'm gonna share them as they do. So I went to Home Depot once and went to the Benjamin Moore color section, so the paint swatches. And I found out in the summertime, I'm antique walnut, and in the winter, I'm toasted bagel. Wonderful. Now I say that because yes, I call myself a Black person, but I also want to be clear that I'm not a monolith, right? I do speak from my perspective and many perspectives that I've heard all over, but at the same time, our experiences are very different. And this is why it's important to have representation, and why this story of backpack theory, growing up in St. Albert in a predominantly white area, teachers are white, friends were white. The books that we were read or asked to read usually focused on white stories. The movies we watched, same thing. Everything and nothing really represented myself. So myself, I saw in very stereotypical ways, and not even knowing how damaging they were at the time, because it was just my reality. So, high school, then I go to university. As Aaron mentioned before, I went to school in Atlanta, Georgia. Went to Morehouse College. Morehouse College is a all-Black, historically Black college university. Martin Luther King went to school there. Spike Lee went to school there. Samuel Jackson. I went to school there. And when I got there, I noticed something that was quite amazing. So this idea of backpack theory states, when you're born, all of us have a backpack, an invisible one, but the sizes vary depending on how many intersections you have. A straight, white, middle class male might have a smaller backpack than a visibly disabled Indigenous woman in Canada, right? So their backpack might be bigger. What happens is all day long, every day, there are microaggressions, the little small comments, may I touch your hair? Where are you from? Macroaggressions, real life racism occurring, systemic racism, lack of representation. All those things are small pebbles and rocks that are being thrown into your backpack every single day. Some of them you notice, some of them you don't even notice. The systemic racist structures, you don't necessarily notice them, but they are throwing rocks in your backpack. So your backpack gets heavier and heavier and heavier as you get older and older and older. I didn't know I had a backpack on until I went to Morehouse. As soon as I got there, it's like somebody took my backpack off, and I was just a regular person. And I was so free and light. I didn't know that I had been progressively being weighed down day after day after day. I didn't know. And when I say I didn't know, I wasn't like moping around saying, woe is me. I didn't even realize how much weight was being put into my own backpack. And I've seen this numerous times, asking individuals about, their experiences, and them saying, no, it's been fine for me. I didn't really notice. And not noticing does not mean something doesn't exist. So I didn't notice a lot of the things until I knew what it was like when they were gone. That backpack came off, and I could walk taller. My conversations were different. I was surrounded by people that looked like me. The people I loved looked like me. That my teachers were Black, my friends were Black, the people that bugged me were Black, doctors were Black, police officers were Black. Atlanta, they call it Chocolate City. It was amazing. Everywhere I went, I was able just to have conversations without Blackness being the underlying factor of people trying to identify and relate with. It was just regular human to human conversations. And it was an amazing feeling that everyone should have. And I thought that's what's just true. Everyone should feel this way. I got for a moment to understand what it felt like for many other people in this country on a day-to-day basis. The other piece, though, didn't take long until I didn't even notice. I habituated to that too. 2 months later, maybe, didn't really realize it. It just became my normal, my everyday. So that got me thinking, I can't necessarily be so angry at people for not understanding that what they have is special, right? That privilege to be able to walk and talk in a world that was built for you. So when I came back to Canada, backpack theory kind of popped in my mind, and it became one of the most important pieces of being a real ally. I want to make sure that I, as an ally, I am looking for ways to take rocks out of people's backpacks. I don't need to ask to take them out, because we surely didn't ask to have them put them in there. But what things can I do on a daily basis to remove these rocks out of everyone's backpack? Okay, and we look at that, and this is where things become very tangible on a day-to-day thing. You know, what things can I do at work that will remove some rocks out of a backpack because I have less rocks in mine, or maybe today I just have more emotional bandwidth to be able to do this. But then we start to look at the world a little bit different. Start to look around and see, all right, this is fine for me, but does fine for me mean fine for all? And if it doesn't, then what are the differences and what things can I adjust so that everyone's backpack gets a little bit lighter every single day? That idea for me keeps a real nice focus and a swivel of understanding first. All right, here's my privileges. Here's what they are. Now that I know what they are, who can I see that doesn't have them? And then how can I use them to take those rocks out of their backpacks, whatever the things look like? You know, we talked a little bit at the beginning with, I mean, it could be something as simple as changing meeting times. It could be, you know, letting neurodivergent folks learn a little bit differently. It could be recognizing Juneteenth. And not just recognizing it, but maybe now doing some research on what it really is and what it means. And going a step further and actually doing that stuff where, so I like to say, change moves at the speed of empathy. The more we can empathize with people who don't look like us, talk like us, dress like us, eat like us, pray like us, the faster we can do that, the quicker change is actually going to happen. And the less we spend in our lanes, quote unquote, where everything makes sense and is comfortable, that's where change doesn't happen. Change rarely happens in the comfortable spots. And we've all heard getting comfortable being uncomfortable, somewhat of a cliche, but it's a real thing. You know, the more times you actually talk about uncomfortable things, the less uncomfortable they become. And these quote unquote uncomfortable conversations, these awkward conversations, are the conversations that are actually going to move the needle where we need them to happen. You know, a lot of times, you know, folks will ask that idea of like, what do I do? How do I speak about this stuff at home, at work? And the simple answer, which people don't necessarily love, is you just do that. You speak about it at work. You speak about it at home. You don't wait until you know everything to begin. A lot of folks want to wait. They want to make mistakes. But they wait to the point of atrophy, you know, and nothing actually ends up happening, which is so much more damaging. I'd rather have public mistakes with right intentions than would I have someone do nothing, you know, and maybe that's even a good segue just to talk about that idea of intent versus impact, because we do, you know, live in an intent first world. And I think that focus should definitely be an impact first world. You know, impact is all that matters. Intent is just for us. Intent's for our own ego or for a company's image. You know, many times you hear somebody from some company did something that was bad. And then the company comes out and says, we are not racist. We're the least racist company ever. We would never hire a racist person. Well, that's just ignoring the literal impact that just occurred. We see something that happened, it happened. You know, if I was sitting in class and I had a question back before class, like in-person class. Okay, so I'm in class and I have a question. I throw my hand up to answer it. And somebody walked by right when I did that. So I hit them with my hand. Now, my intent was not to hurt anybody. It was just to answer a question. But the impact and the fact and the truth is I did hurt somebody. So that person who's hurt doesn't really care what my intent was. They care that they were harmed. They care that I need to address said harm, apologize for said harm, make some adjustments so that harm doesn't happen again in the future. And then maybe they might care. Nobody cares until they know you care. And so this idea of like, hey, I never intended to hurt anyone. Hey, you ask anyone. I'm the least violent person in the world. This person who's actually been hurt by me doesn't care about these words because the impact was I actually did hurt the person. Impact-driven life is a perfect way to get information, to change and pivot faster than saying and doubling down on what your intentions were so other people understand what kind of person you might be. You know, I intended to get an A, professor, in my exam, but I got an F. But hey, I intended to get an A. There's no prof that's going to change my grade. Obviously, the things I did that led up to that intention and that ultimate impact weren't right. So I would have to adjust and figure it out moving forward. But this is the beautiful part about it. When you live an impact-driven life, you get immediate feedback. You know, you get a feedback, you can get your ego out of the way, and you can make change much quicker. And if for all people, I think that's much, much better. It's really easy to hide behind the intent, and we do it all the time. There's actually a lot of things that we do whenever we're confronted with making an impact that wasn't one that we ideally wanted to do. There's an exercise that I like to talk about. So it's just, well, just imagine for a second that all of us are wearing steel toe boots. So boots that got steel on them. And so that's our privilege, right? And then other people, we'll call the oppressed folk, are wearing flip-flops, sandals, their toes are out, all right? So imagine we step on someone's toes. And this is usually what happens, right? So we step on someone's toes and people, so we'll call it us right now, we center ourselves sometimes. So someone says, ouch, you're stepping on my toes. Centering yourself would look like this. I'd say, I can't believe you think I'm a toe stepper. I'm a good person, right? Okay, so this is my intentions? No, I'm not even admitting I stepped on your toe. I just can't believe you call me that. So I hear this all the time. Somebody says or does something that is harmful and racist. And then someone says, hey, that was racist. I can't believe you think I'm racist. I'm a good person, right? That'd be centering yourself. Another thing that happens, we deny the other person's experiences if they're different from our own, right? So, ow, you're stepping on my toes. Well, I don't mind when people step on my toes. Wow. Okay. So this happens all the time as well. So, maybe, somebody someone's using a racial slur. I guess that would be right. So I use a racial slur towards somebody and they say, hey, you're being racist. And I'm like, well, I don't mind when people say that to me. Obviously, that's irrelevant because we're talking about the impact of what actually occurred. Another thing we as people do, we like to derail, right? Ow, you're stepping on my toes. Well, look, some people don't even have toes. Why aren't we talking about them instead? This idea of, this happens all the time. So we'll talk about, it's usually like oppression Olympics. People do this. We may talk about the enslavement times, and then someone else wants to talk about, well, the Irish were slaves, and happens here. Why aren't we talking about this thing happening over here? We're not saying we can't, but currently this is what we're talking about. Another one that's really close is refusal to center the person who's actually impacted, right? The idea of, well, all toes matter. I feel like that one's, this happened a lot, right? All lives matter. We weren't even talking about all lives, not until we started talking about Black lives. And we weren't even talking about all the toes until we started talking about my toes. Tone policing online, this happens all the time, right? I'd move my foot if you asked me nicer, if you spoke more politely. And this is a very dangerous one too. This one actually happens a lot with microaggressions, tone policing. Because a microaggression, another word of that is, death by 1,000,000 mosquitoes or 1,000 paper cuts. And so maybe that, 999 paper cuts have happened and then someone giving one more little paper cut. And I'm reacting to 1,000 paper cuts, but that person feels like they just did something small. And they're like, well, I don't understand why this disproportionate amount of vitriol is coming back my way. Well, this is why. There's a history, and that history keeps score. And that score, sometimes you're on the receiving end of it. And one of the questions you might want to ask yourself in those periods of time is like, what, instead of being so upset and personally hurt, what could have somebody feel this way at this time? Some introspection. And what can I do to help take some of the rocks out of that backpack so that doesn't happen anymore? Anyways, keep going. Denying the problem's fixable. This is another one. Toes getting stepped on is a fact of life, or racism is just a fact of life. You just got to understand that. Victim blaming. You shouldn't have been walking around without boots. These are all different ways that we address being told that we've done something, and not understanding what our privilege is, and then responding with that intent versus the impact of what should happen. Like, impact answers are real easy. Are you okay? We listen to their response and learn. We say sorry. We move our foot. We stop stepping on people's toes. Seems really simple, but yet we do catch ourselves in the middle of this very, very often. But allyship is about, this is what allyship is about, right? How do we be effective allies? It's important to know what an ally actually is and what an ally isn't. Now, a lot of times we hear ally, and there's this thing called performative allyship, where people are, they want to let you know how great of an ally they are. They're like, hey, everybody, it's Black History Month, and I just wanted to send an email out to everyone letting you know that I put a donation to, the NAACP and this, and I got a black square up on my Instagram. Like, this is great. I'm not mad that you made a donation, but the reason, and you want to tell people so you can get some points, extra clout, that's not what allyship is. Allyship is basic human decency. Basic human decency. It's really the lowest bar you can imagine. And it's not, one doesn't want to brag about basic human decency. That'd be like bragging about brushing your teeth every morning, or, hey, I wash my hands after I went to the washroom. Like, yeah, you're supposed to. And yes, you're supposed to treat people with basic human decency. So now that we know that the bar is low, it should be an expectation that we are allies for each other. So, but how do we become really good allies? Big pieces are listening and believing stories of other people, amplifying and sponsoring other people. So using our platforms to elevate, making sure that ideas that are often not heard are heard. Putting your neck out there sometimes. When you see something, say something. The idea of, if somebody's doing something that is harmful, racist, discriminatory, that you speak up. You speak up in spaces where those people aren't, and you speak up in spaces where they are. Great allies are going to take time, and they're going to learn on their own without being prompted. They're going to be excited about finding out new information and finding out how to make their team be more inclusive, how to create more safe spaces for individuals. Here's another thing, safe spaces. Every single one of us listening here, I don't care where we are on earth, we want to feel safe at home and at work. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel loved. And once those things can exist, then we can be super courageous and we can be brave. And if that's our work environment, that's the foundation, then amazing things will happen left, right, and center. But that's got to be the goal, right? Of safe spaces that are, you feel like you belong, that you feel heard, that you feel like you matter, that you feel that there's love. Once you could do that, it's unbelievable what can happen. And being a great ally is like, let me create this foundation, let me create this environment. And there's many other pieces of what amazing allyship is, and we can keep going through this, but this idea of understanding what our privileges are, and leading an impact-led life, not letting intent to kind of get in there. There's a fun analogy about like believing other people's stories that I'll share with you right now. So I got this analogy where my friend Skylar is a white guy, I'm a black guy, antique walnut in the summer. Okay, so Skylar and I, we went to Mexico on a vacation, and it's a great vacation. We got home and we're just talking about the vacation. Like, Skylar, how was it? It was great. Wasn't it wild? He's like, man, yeah, I loved it. I had a great time. The only thing is the sunburn. I had a horrible sunburn. I'm like, sunburn? You got a sunburn? Skylar looked at me. He's like, yeah, I got a sunburn. I'm like, are you sure you got a sunburn? Skylar says, yes, Jesse, I know what a sunburn feels like. I've had one before. Like, I don't know why. Maybe it's eczema or psoriasis. Skylar's getting a little annoyed. I know what it feels like. I've gotten sunburns my whole life. I know the pain of a sunburn. I know a sunburn so well that even before it's a sunburn, I can feel it coming. I'm like, uh-oh, this is definitely sunburn on its way. I got to be extra careful. I'm like, maybe you just don't use sunscreen right, or you didn't use an umbrella. Because look, I didn't get a sunburn. My family didn't get a sunburn. I don't know why you always want to blame the sun every time your skin hurts. So this sounds silly that I'm saying this. Of course, Skylar knows what a sunburn feels like. He's gotten them his whole life. Skylar's white. His skin makes more sense to burn than mine would. So he's the expert on sunburns. But when the tables are turned and I say, hey, Skylar, man, how was the shopping trip? I'm like, it was okay, but it was just really annoying that the security guard was following me around when I was just trying to shop. Also, when I was driving in, I don't know, I feel like I got treated unfairly by the police. They pulled me over for nothing. I don't even know what happened. Skylar's like, are you sure? Like maybe you were probably speeding, right? Or maybe he wasn't following you around. You're probably just being paranoid. I'm like, I know what it feels like to be racially profiled. I know what it feels like to be treated unfairly. Skylar's like, why are you always trying to blame the system for how they're treating you? Because Skylar, our skin's different, right? So this analogy for, instead of me just believing Skylar had sunburn, instead of Skylar just believing my real life story, we didn't match each other's, so we wanted to poke holes in it. That's not being a great ally. A great ally is just understanding, and how can I help? How can I maybe, hey, next time we go on vacation, I brought some SPF 600. I was going to keep it in my bag for you, Skylar, just so that we could both have a great time. My little zinc buddy. It would be great. But this idea of being a good ally is one of another way of doing this. That really idea of understanding and believing other people's stories, believing the stories of other marginalized individuals, even if they don't make sense to you. It's this idea, like we mentioned, elevating people, taking the initiative to learn on our own. Understanding change does move at the speed of empathy, and getting our egos out of the way and knowing that we're going to make mistakes. 100%. We have to. There's no other way to move forward. And if we're not making mistakes, I would venture to say that we're not doing enough. We're not actually sticking our neck out as much as we need to for the people that we say matter. And a lot of this, these initiatives and creating these spaces, it's one thing in your own personal life, but like in the business world, like at Keyfactor, this stuff has to happen top down. It's this cascading of worldviews, top down and bottom up, but it can't just be a wish. Like diversity is a game of numbers. You can just hire and hire and hire, but inclusivity and equity that's the game of impact. Like, so you have to actively do things, and it has to be actively engagement from all different levels. Actually, there's some companies that I had done some research on that I felt were doing a really great job of making like real tangible change. So like American Express, what they do, this is a nice thing, they have mandatory inclusivity training for their leaders at the VP level and above. So it's mandatory. Like oftentimes I'll go to companies, we do DEI work, but it's not, they'll be excited if the VPs, if the C levels show up to these meetings. Like it's just like, oh wow, they might even show up. Where AIM at American Express is about this idea that it is a mandatory thing, understanding that this top-down approach is important, and unpacking what inclusion is in the workplace so they can then discuss it with their groups. And I think it's that idea, when you see that, I feel and I trust that it is a priority. I'll buy into it when I know that those above me who are leading the teams are also doing that same thing. Capital One, they do another thing. They have a sponsorship program, so they advance their Black leaders. What they do is they look at the challenges that commonly stand in the way for advancement for Black leaders in the corporate world, and then they sponsor programs to ensure that they can, combat against that. That understanding. For me, I'm like, what a great place. I know that they'll take care of me. I'm a focus. There's may not be as much representation at the top, but I can see a real plan of how they're going to try and fix that, right? Chevron's another one. Chevron, it's Pride Month. This is what my braids. So those like in Canada right now, it's Pride Month. It was supposed to be a rainbow, but I couldn't find yellow. Nonetheless, Chevron, what they do is they promote Pride a lot, which is great. And they recently, this is like rather recently, they have employees all have a 10-page guidebook for transgender community, and making sure that they are understanding what that culture is, so they can create safe spaces for individuals as they move into the workplace, and just a better understanding in general, which is amazing. And there's been many other ones. I can't go through all the companies that I was enjoying what they're doing, but it was more than a game of numbers. It was more than lip service. You know, oftentimes it's Black History Month, so a company will put a fist on their logo. You know, Pride Month, they just put a rainbow. But like, what are we doing? And how is it actually pushing real change and making things move forward the way we need it to? Oh, there's so many things, but I also want to do questions because 50 minutes shows up quick. Questions are the best. Yeah, you know what we'll do? Let's do that. Let's get into the questions. And then if by chance we have a little bit more time, we will. But yeah, I think it's time. Questions are the best. We can get really into it. So I didn't take a look at all during the chat box because, you know, I was just chatting. If you see any that I missed in there, let me know. And then we will move forward. Oh, I see. What is an Emancipation Proclamation? Okay, well, Emancipation Proclamation was that. It was a proclamation of emancipating the enslaved individuals, basically stating that slavery was now illegal in the United States of America. Interesting, too, on that. So I just finished voicing an audiobook, and the audiobook was called A House Built by Slaves. It was an Abraham Lincoln story. And in the book, sidebar, I voiced over 80 different voices for this book, like from Frederick Douglass to Abe Lincoln to Sojourner Truth, men and women from all over. It was kind of a wild undertaking. But the book itself, what I loved about it was telling this story mostly of many of the Black men and women that came to the executive mansion, that came to the White House to speak to Abraham Lincoln, to express what they needed, what they wanted, what they desired. This is in the time of right before to right after Emancipation Proclamation. And in these stories and in these letters, there were so many people that were begging for things for their children and their children's children. And I, at this time, I'm voicing them. I'm giving them actual voices that had never been heard before, reading the words that they had been pleading for. And then it hit me, I'm the kids that they were praying, working, and hoping for. And I'm in here doing this thing, and it gave me goosebumps. I'm like, they didn't know me and I didn't know them, but they were working for me right now. And it really gave some real purpose to the work I'm doing right now. I don't know, neither do we. Yes, of course, we're trying to help our immediate right now, but we're doing so much more than that with every one of these conversations. Every time you write a question and discuss it, every time something is documented of real change that's happening, we're not just changing right now, we're actually like laying the groundwork for many, 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 many generations. And there's no little thing. And this wasn't like MLK and Malcolm X. These are just regular, everyday people that took a walk, wrote a letter, and then I was reading that letter, and that letter has really had some real impact to where we are today. I thought that was very, very special. But that's the long answer. Emancipation Proclamation was the official 1865 June 19th date that slavery across all the states, including the Southern Confederate states, was then illegal. I don't want you to mix that up with saying that then things were good for people, because there's a thing called Jim Crow laws that came in afterwards. And then we can talk about today where, private prison systems and, just it goes on and on and on. But nonetheless, it became at least illegal on paper. All right. Yeah. All right. So and also feel free to like unmute and video and say hello to me if you have any other questions, because it would be nice to see a human being.
Hey, Jesse, I saw one question that Rich Say asked. It said, has the world arrived at a place where we cannot have a conversation about each other's personalities, characteristics, or traits that we sincerely want to compliment or understand without automatically, quote, adding rocks to the backpack?
Yeah, I mean, maybe they could. It depends, I guess, on how you ask a question. So a lot of these things are like possibly, depending on how a person asks a question, what their intent of asking their question is, and then believing the impact of it. Because Like some folks are like, man, I'm so tired. Everyone's so sensitive, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if that's where you're at and everyone's sensitive and you find that there's not that much to be sensitive about, then kudos to you. What an amazing space to be in, which means you probably have a lot of bandwidth to help folks maybe be less sensitive by helping take some rocks out of their backpack. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing when we can actually talk about how we're feeling and how something's impacted us. There's no bad thing that happens in making a safer space for individuals. Oftentimes people who feel like things are too sensitive also maybe don't feel like they have the space to be able to offer what issues they'd like to share, and we can provide that to them. My fifth grade came home from school recently talking about how his friend's older brother was being very racist and using the N-word. I wasn't sure how to tell him to deal with this. Okay, so I mean, that's interesting. It's like your son, your fifth grader, his friend's older brother was using it and he wasn't sure how to use it. Well, I mean, I guess the advice is tough advice because it's not specific. I don't know, the fifth grader giving those instructions, but ideally, you know, I'm not comfortable with someone using that word. You can tell somebody that. I mean, kids are using it left, right, and center, which is a discussion I have with a lot of schools right now. I personally am of the mind, I don't use it personally, although as a Black person, it's every right to do so. But it's not something I'd like to use. I find there's so many more beautiful words in the English language that I can use. I like to say, what's up, my king? What's up, queen? Many different things. But what would you tell your kid? I tell your kid, speak your mind and say, listen, I'm not comfortable hearing that. I think it's harmful. That's enough. So you speak what you need. I don't feel safe with that word. Tell a teacher that that's happening. Teachers, unfortunately, usually don't have the tools either in that mode. What I'd love to see is that this type of education can happen in the class of the origins of the word, what it meant, why it was said, why the culture decided to reclaim it, and why it's not a word for everybody. And being okay having those conversations. Oftentimes elementary school doesn't want to touch on certain things, but recess does. And right outside of school does. So I'd rather arm our children with the tools to use properly so that they can actually be, you know, and have some agency in the environments they want to create, even at a fifth grade level.
Do you have any children's books that you recommend to talk about some of this stuff?
Yeah, actually I do here. I'll put one in the chat. I guess there's a couple of them. How to Be Anti-Racist is one, and there's one for kids, and it's a nonfiction book. And then I'll do my own plug. I have a book that I wrote called Jars, which is a science fiction book, fantasy book, which deals with many race issues, LGBTQ2+. It's about a mixed race, non-binary, neurodivergent person with superpowers that saves the world and also finds out like the origins of humanity. Lots of fun multiverse and superpowery stuff, which is a great YA novel, you know, like 14 to 22 kind of thing, which is some of my favorite reading. But yeah, so that's those are some good ones for sure. So if you can get that, it's on Audible and Google, both of them really easily. I saw a question just about to happen. Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
I was gonna just say something real quick, Jesse. Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm the CEO here at Keyfactor, and
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for speaking today. I thought it was great. You know, I really like the change moves at the speed of empathy. I put that in the chat. So thank you for the whole conversation today. I'm at the airport. I'm at LaGuardia. I'm about to board a flight, but I just wanted to say thank you and really appreciate the discussion. And you know, I think it's important for our business to, you know, have these discussions, not just at this time of year, but year round. And, you know, when I think of Keyfactor and I think the fact that we're a global enterprise with, you know, people in all sorts of countries from all sorts of backgrounds, I think, you know, empathy and meeting people where they're at is really important to our organization and really important in general from a human, you know, standpoint. So thank you very much, but I appreciate it.
I was going to say, Jordan, meeting people where they're at is something that I think is so overlooked often, right? Like there's a lot of individuals who will feel they're here on their activist journey or they're here on their learning journey. And I assume everyone should be here when I'm here. And that's not real life. You know, it's not real life. What real life is there's A to Z, and if ideally all we want to be able to agree on is that we're headed to Z. If we can all agree we're headed to Z, then I don't care if you're at B or if you're at W. There's steps and ways to get there, and we can have we can have a little patience with people, have grace with individuals. We can allow people to make mistakes because we agree that our end is the same. So the means might be a bumpy road there, but I love that, people were that it's super key. And that's the thing I think all of us need to be able to give people that. The number one piece is let's be on the same page of where we're headed,
Yeah. As a side, I grew up in Atlanta as well, and I went to Georgia Tech, and I played a lot of pickup basketball in my college days with a lot of guys from Morehouse. So
okay, Jordan. Sorry to derail this team. What year was that? How old are you?
I graduated in 2008.
Okay.
2008.
Okay, so a long time after. I graduated in 2002. So
yeah. But anyway, I gotta get through security, but thank you.
Yeah. Take it easy. I was about to find out if I had dunked on Jordan. Just high probability, probably.
Hey Jesse, thanks for talking to us. What should be the takeaway from your talk today? You want to summarize and say, hey, what's the one or two things we should all take away?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Ideally, there's some things you found that resonated with you, but if I had to pick, without a doubt, it would be an impact life, right? So this idea that let's listen to the impact of my actions, listen to it and believe it, even if it does not match what your intent was. That allowing your reality to not necessarily be the truth of somebody else's and being able to adjust is probably a very, very powerful and strong thing that you can do. Next one would be finding ways to use your own privileges as superpowers. And in doing so, finding ways to take rocks out of other people's backpacks without being asked. So how do we do it without being asked? We do it by being a great ally, by actually, using our own initiative to learn and educate ourselves on certain things we might not know. And once you have education and tools, you're like, you start to see things differently. You start to look at things differently, and you can start to remove some of these barriers, like we talked about at the very, very beginning. Who's at the table? Who's not at the table? What barriers are there that are preventing them from getting to the table? And we start to see what all these things are through different lenses, and understanding that unconscious bias is there for all of us. Every one of us. Every one of us is prejudiced. You can't help it. We live in a world that has created that. So knowing that every one of us is a part of the problem, it's really easy for us to point fingers at other people who seemingly are doing worse and more damage, and that kind of lets us off the hook. I'd say instead of that, understand that all of us have created the environment that we're currently in, and that if all of us do a little bit more today than we did yesterday, and repeat, we are on a very, very expeditious path to some wonderful things. But we got to look in the mirror and understand that it's up to us.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey Jesse, this is Gail Joyce calling from our People Experience team. Nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us today. Love your shirt. I think I'm gonna go buy myself one. Right, constant reminder of what we need to be reinforcing, not only to our children but to one another. So I'm gonna make things awkward. You've raised some very real, raw things today, which I appreciate. Coming up as your authentic you, which is great. In a work environment and in such a politically correct world that we live in, any recommendations on how we continue to have these open dialogues and conversation with one another, and from an organizational perspective, right? I feel like we're always striking that balance of let's be politically correct, but we also want to kind of call elephants out in the room. Anything that you have in terms of continuum recommendations?
Yeah. I think, it always goes down to this idea of what environment are we creating in the quote unquote closed system that we control, right? So if it's a work environment, what is the culture? What are we allowing? So we need to allow bravery. We need to allow people to, take small risks within their business without fear of disproportionate backlash. Right. So if there can be a culture and an environment set that, and I really put like an underline under small risks, right? Because all of this stuff is, it's all, there's so much in that is in the gray area, and the real world is lots in that gray area. So when I say small risk, like I should be able to bring up something that affected me or I thought was somewhat damaging to whether it be myself or someone else, without fear that there will be huge backlash as a result, or being ostracized or a job lost. Because if we're in fear of that, then it's really hard for people to put their neck out for somebody else or to say a certain thing. But if we've created that environment and people know that's okay, then that's where you start to see more and more people become brave. That idea where I was like, we all want to belong, we want to feel safe, we want to feel loved and respected. Once those things happen, as we all know, that sounds like a really good relationship, right? So when you have a good relationship, you can bring up things that didn't go so well without worry that I guess our relationship's over. So that idea of creating that environment where you have a foundation that's strong enough for you to be able to bring up things that might not be the most comfortable, I think would be the best start. Because if it's the opposite, then your system's not closed. And so the grievances now are being talked about on the outside of the system. And so because there's no space inside. And so now those who are inside of it are actually attacking it from the outside. And then everyone feels upset. Well, I never had a chance to talk about it. And well, I've never even brought it up because there's never an opportunity, and I was scared to do this, right? And that whole thing cascades. So when you create that really safe, closed system, then, it's kind of almost impenetrable, and also a really place where people want to go. Like, what an amazing dream to know that I can't wait to go to work because that's the safe spot where I can voice some stuff. That would be an amazing dream. And it's something that we have the ability to create.
Appreciate your perspective on that. Thank you.
Mm. Wonderful. So if by chance anyone has questions that they didn't ask, I am always available on my Instagram. You can just throw a question in there, usually 48 hours max. I will answer it, or just come by to say what's up. But I appreciate it. Keynote, this is great. It's good to meet some of you. It's good to see some of your names in white on black, even some of you with logos. Beautiful.
Where'd you buy that shirt, Jesse? Where'd you buy that shirt?
Oh, it was online. It was online. I saw it. I loved it. And if you just type in Raising Kind Humans sweater, they pop up. They have a whole bunch of awesome different sayings, but I have 3 sons. And so I don't know. I love this. It's just, this is what I'm trying to do. It's what I'm trying to do. It's all we want to be, is around kind human beings anyway. So trying to do my best job. Father's Day, Sunday. Happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. Happy belated Mother's Day for those who I missed.
I don't see any other questions coming through. Well, thank you, Jesse. Thank you to Go Local for hosting. And, as you mentioned, you can always reach out to him, it sounds like, on Instagram. And if there's anything that the People Experience team can do to further this conversation, or if you have any follow-up thoughts or ideas for us, we're always open to it. So appreciate everyone for joining. I hope you got a little something out of it, how to be a better ally, and more things that we can do as an organization and as people. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.